Hello, America. Welcome to Your Leo Nation. I'm getting my mic just slid in here a little closer because my big mouth is not big enough. I am the Chief Mark Garrett. So happy to have you here. We are the place where we believe in and support the rule of law. And man, we're talking about law in a big way today. And quite frankly, I'm going to use a phrase that's been coined by other people. That's lawfare. There's a lot of lawfare going on, I think, right now in this country. You probably know what I'm talking about. But I think to an extent, I think greater than I've seen so far, we're going to dig into it today. And that is mostly due to the gentleman. Can I call you a gentleman, Anthony?
Please.
Or was that a stretch of the imagination? So,
Might be a
Anthony
stretch.
Jackson. Yes, Anthony right there. I call him AJ. Anthony is not only a guest today, but he is the producer and the technical wizard behind in the show here. But Anthony digs up so much information that I bring to you as an audience. A lot I do myself, but a lot Anthony brings, and we collaborate behind the scenes and a lot. But the clip that he provided me a few days ago, I thought, you know what? Not only do we have to play this clip, but I have to have you on to talk about it because he found it. And it's just great. Anthony, before we actually run it, and ladies and gentlemen, we're going to show and play this for you so you can watch and listen to it. But I want to give you a couple of minutes, Anthony, to talk about what you found before we actually play it, and then we'll get right into it.
Okay. Yeah. So I came across an old video, it's about 8 years old, by Judge Engoron, wherever you say his name.
Mhm.
And he gives one of the driest speeches you've ever heard. And it was honestly, each minute felt like a microwave minute. It's 20 minutes long, but it seems way longer. He he goes on to start saying some of the things that we're seeing today where we're scratching our heads and going, how is he coming up with this? How is he ruling on this or that? And the video kind of really explains his ideology and what he is thinking on his ego, his own ego and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and play it and show you a few parts of it that we thought was the most interesting. There was a lot of other parts in there too that were weird. So if you want to
Mhm.
check it out, you'll see the title in the video and we'll link it in the description too. So you can see it for yourself. But yeah, we'll just go ahead and show
Yeah, it's
it, bro.
fantastic. And for those of you who play, who's Enguerrand? And remember, this is the guy who is presiding or presided over the Donald Trump case in New York with the prosecutor, the attorney general, Leticia James. We're going to talk about her as well. But this is a case of inflating uh, values of properties where Trump was charged or sued civilly by the state of New York, specifically by the Attorney General, Leticia James. So that's who Engoron or Enguerrand, whatever way you want to pronounce his name, is. So with that said, like Anthony said, this is drier than chalk in the Mojave Desert in July, but the substance is very interesting. When I say drier, it's his delivery. It's like, my God, could you just go to a speech class, sir? But anyway,
Yeah.
hey, it's the substance of what he says that Anthony found so interesting, and I do too. That what you hear, you don't need to watch the whole thing here. We have a few short clips we want you to watch, and we're going to talk about it. So, Anthony, with that said, go ahead and hit it.
Well, that's a great oversimplification, although it's an interesting question. We don't just decide cases. I don't get a case and say, okay, plaintiff wins, the defendant wins. They get decided at different stages, and I'll just run through this real fast. If you're going to sue somebody, you have to tell them you're suing them so they can come defend themselves. We call it due process. A lot of times cases are decided by being thrown out. Somebody didn't get notice. Plaintiff could say, well, the defendant promised to give me $1,000. Well, that gets thrown out because the promise isn't binding unless there's consideration. So you make a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim. All right, maybe true, but so what? The next stage is summary judgment, where, all right, everybody has to swear, put in a sworn statement, and let's see, is there a real issue for trial or is the outcome predetermined? Finally, there are trials. They're sort of the most.
Okay. So that was the first bit that we have.
Here's what's interesting about this, ladies and gentlemen. My take on it, and Anthony, chime in whenever you want to. But he's talking about you just don't decide cases basically willy nilly and things like this. I'm not a lawyer, don't pretend to be a lawyer. I never went to law school, but I was a cop for 30 years and I testified in a lot of trials, not only criminal, but also civil, because out of criminal investigations or traffic accidents, often there are civil trials that accompany them, so to speak. They come out of these other criminal investigations. And so there are two types of trials. There are jury trials that most people are familiar with, and there was called, I think he called non-jury trials or court trials that I was used to, which means a judge decides everything. This is really funny here. He's talking about how things are decided and not in a haphazard way. I'm actually paraphrasing, but he decided Engoron or Enguerrand decided on this case without ever hearing from any witness in the case, without ever hearing from Donald Trump, without ever hearing from the people who loaned the money, the financial institutions, there were many institutions that loaned him money based on the valuations. He did what's called a summary judgment. He decided that Trump was liable, that he had violated law before he ever heard from any of these witnesses based just on documents that he saw, from what I understand. So there were definitely, in this case, there were 180-degree opposing opinions about the valuations of Trump's properties from a lot of different people. By the way, one of the people on the one end of that spectrum is the judge himself, who evaluated his Mar-a-Lago property $18 million, which is a complete farce. But the point of all this in this clip, Anthony, that you found, he's talking about how you don't decide things just like that. Doesn't mean that you can't have a summary judgment, that you can't say, oh, there's just so much evidence here, I'm going to go ahead and decide if someone's liable or not. That certainly is a case, but it certainly is possible and legal. But in this case, anybody who looks at all the information, especially the witnesses involved, the non-victims, the creditors, the people who loan Trump money, none of them, not only did none of them claim to be a victim, they all said they would go back and do business with Trump again because he's such a great bet for them. He paid his loans off ahead of time in a lot of cases, or on time. They made a lot of money off of him and nothing was done wrong in their eyes. So that's my bit on this. This is my 2 cents on this part of it with Enguerrand. Anthony, you have something to chime in with there since I took up all the oxygen in the
No,
room?
you said it. You articulated perfectly. You want to move on to the next part?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, cut two.
Yes. Alrighty.
Part of the whole business. And there are two types, jury trials and non-jury trials. I once worked for a judge and he had a non-jury trial. I said, that's great. You get to decide the law and the facts. And he said, no, that's not great. I don't want to decide the facts. I want a jury to decide the facts. Oh, okay. And now that I do a lot of non-jury trials, I feel the same way. How do I know who's lying? I don't have a lie detector. Plaintiff says I had the green light. Defendant says I had the green light. The witness says plaintiff.
Yep. Now this, Anthony, do you want to take it here or want me to continue?
Continue. You're doing a beautiful job
Yeah.
on it.
So this, okay, so this bolsters, and I get bolsters, I get a little ahead of myself on that first clip, but I knew it was coming and this builds into it. Now he speaks specifically about jury trials and non-jury trials, jury trials or court trials, either way you want to say it, court or non-jury, just the judge. And he right here, he articulates to this crowd that he was talking about, I think another judge or professor or whatever it was before who said he doesn't like non-jury
Mhm.
trials because as a judge, he doesn't feel that he should be deciding facts, that he should only be ruling on the law. So when you have a non-jury trial, when you don't have a judge, that judge, by definition, now has to decide on facts and rule on the law. And this is exactly he did. And when you read other statements from this guy, from this judge, he did exactly that. He ruled on the facts of the case without hearing from witnesses. Now, later on, you hear from witnesses, but this is after that he had made a summary judgment against Donald Trump that Donald Trump was liable, that he was actually committed the allegations that the Attorney General, Leticia James, had filed against Trump, that he had defrauded the creditors, that he had harmed the people of New York, whatever it was. He decided, just based on document filings, that Trump had done this. Now, so he did decide the facts of the case as a judge, and he did it with glee. And that's what I was going to say a second ago. If you look at some of the transcripts of what he said in the courtroom, he did this, in my opinion, he did this without objectivity. He did it with subjectivity. I'm going to get into that. And it's the final clip we're going to play, ladies and gentlemen. We just want to sum this up to you. It's based on other things he's done in the past, where, in my opinion, it shows lack of objectivity and it shows lack of deference to the, the rule of law. Absolutely a lack of deference to the rule of law. But he did exactly what he said he does not like to do in this clip, and that he decided that someone was in violation without actually allowing the people who were supposedly wronged, the supposed victims in this case, the creditors, these banks from around the world that had loaned Donald Trump untold amounts of money based on the valuations of his property, who later on, in the penalty side of the case, they came in after a judge had said, nope, he is liable for this. And then on the penalty side, where you decide how much he's going to fine Trump, which is another egregious abuse of his authority, what he did in that amount, then he lets them come in. But he never let the supposed victims speak to determine whether or not Trump had actually violated any law or defrauded people. So I want to make that clear. This guy is clearly not behaving in the courtroom the way he told this set of, by the way, speaking to a set of journalists who I could comment as well later on. It's a whole different podcast. But he's not behaving in the courtroom that way he said he behaved in the courtroom to this audience he's listening. So, Anthony, with that, let's do the final clip here. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, like I always say, this show is about the rule of law. And trust me, trust Anthony, this show today is specifically about the rule of law. And we're going to tell you why here. We're going to tie this up in a knot and tell you exactly why it's so important. It's so important to know what this guy is up to, and Leticia James, and how it relates to other parts of the rule of law. So with that, Anthony, go ahead and play cut 3 for us. We're going to wind it up here with Judge fingernails on the chalkboard.
And you know what, I'd like to add too that a great point that you brought up, that he listened to the witnesses after he did the summary judgment. He was a weasel for this, because he actually could say that he used the evaluations from so-called experts. And is he stating facts? Sure, that he came up, that he chose. He chose those facts. So it's like alternative facts. It's somebody that said, oh, Mar-a-Lago is worth this much in their opinion. He chose the one that he wanted to go with. And I know that you're going to,
This is 100%.
I know you're going to go down that a little bit later on in the show about how he weasels out of that. So he's not responsible for it. But in reality, he's the one who actually chose that number and other numbers to say that Trump defrauded these investors and these banks that made God knows how much money from Trump. So I just wanted to let that
Well,
go.
Anthony, it's a great point that, in other words, there's facts all over the place in any case. But the point of a trial is to weigh all of the facts, all of the evidence. And that includes, from a defendant's point of view, exculpatory evidence. In other words, evidence that may lead to the conclusion that the defendant that did not commit the crime charge, or in this case, the civil offense charge. So exculpatory evidence is as important. Matter of fact, it is the law. You must consider exculpatory evidence. You must consider evidence that weighs in favor and against the defendant equally. And you raise a good point. He clearly, in other words, you would think that the statements from the supposed victims would be a huge consideration in a case like this. And you're right, he did not use these people during the, quite frankly, the fact finding part of the trial, which led to his summary judgment, judging before he actually had any witnesses before him. With that, go ahead and cut 3, Anthony.
All right.
Am I following the law or am I making law? Okay, I'm following law. I'm an impartial referee, but it's hard to factor out my own emotions. And I have tools. Somebody can say, well, Your Honor, you have to throw out this case because it's just like another case. Well, is it just like another case? What if the defendant was wearing a red sweater instead of a blue sweater? Well, that's an extreme example. That wouldn't distinguish most cases, but there are other facts that do. Maybe the education of somebody who supposedly entered into a contract would decide whether the contract was binding. I have a tool that I'll call a tool called estoppel. Somebody makes an argument and I say, you can't make that argument. You made a different argument 3 months ago in this case, or even in another case. So I wish you all luck.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, I'm just laughing because you and I listened to the entire thing, Anthony, and like this guy, he needs to go to a speech class because you talk about putting somebody to sleep. Um, I had to snort no-dos just to get through 18 minutes of them. But anyway, with that said, talks about following the rule of law, and I don't make the law. I rule on the law. I mean, he said something to that effect in that clip, right?
Yes.
I don't make the law. So I want everybody to really hang on for a second and keep that in mind that he says he doesn't make the law. I pulled an article up here I pulled a couple of articles up and from the New York Post, and this is the second one. This is from September of last year, from 2023. And the title is Mar-a-Lago Judge's Developer Hating Past is a Big Win for Donald Trump. Now, again, this is before the whole trial happened and the ruling and the $454 million bogus penalty and things like this has since been reduced, the bond at least. But it talks about, just like the title says here in the New York Post, talks about his really hatred from their point of view in this article about about developers, Enguerrand's dislike for developers in general. And talks about, Anthony, what you said about picking and choosing which facts he wants to consider. In other words, there was somebody who threw out an $18 million, some property person or whatever, but this is from a long time ago about Mar-a-Lago. And then some current assessors had it up to $300 million, which I think is still undervalued, but he did not use a $300 million assessment. He chose to use the $18 million assessment. We know it's completely bogus. When we know about properties literally, let's say next door in the vicinity of Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate that are just empty lots that are right now on the market for $150 million. The idea that the property is only worth $18 million, Mar-a-Lago, is beyond ludicrous. Now, having said that, going back to what he said a second ago in that clip about only following the law and ruling on the law. So I'm going to read an excerpt here from the New York Post. When developers wanted to put up a few tall towers north of the Manhattan Bridge, some local sued to block the project because he said it violated zoning. Enguerrand found that it didn't. In other words, it didn't violate any zoning laws. This project, these developers wanted to engage in. But he just didn't like it anyway. He said, quote, "You can just do this because the zoning allows it. I just can't believe this is the case," unquote. Alas, in Enguerrand, it was the case. So the higher court reversed him. He stopped this project even though it did not violate any zoning laws, but he didn't like the project, regardless of what the zoning laws said. And what happened? he got reversed. He got reversed because what did he do? He violated the zoning laws. He said, I'm going to stop the project, even though the people, the city council, whatever it is, had all voted that this type of project is completely within the law, it's permitted, but I'm going to stop it anyway because of my personal preference. Does that sound to you, Anthony, like someone who shows great deference to the law when it comes to certain things that he may or may not like personally?
Definitely not. He's been showing his bias for years. And now with this high profile case with Trump, we could just see right through it.
Yep. That's one case. The final one that I'm going to share here, same article. Last year, Enguerrand, I see it both ways because I want to be respectful to your honor, tongue in cheek, held up a plan to build new housing on a parking lot near the South Street Seaport because he claimed the developer had an quote unquote impermissible relationship with the Landmarks Preservation Commission. In fact, the judge just didn't like the plan. That decision, too, was tossed in a unanimous decision by the appeals court. He was tossed, and both times his rulings were overturned simply because he didn't like the projects, not because someone had violated law. Now, ladies and gentlemen, like I said a few minutes ago, what Anthony and I are building to right here is so important because whether this is not about Donald Trump, it certainly is in the microcosm here, specifically the case we're talking about is Trump, but in the more important issue, in the more important sense, it's not about Donald Trump. It's about the rule of law that we talk about on this program all the time. The judge is overturned twice in these civil cases because he was not ruling based on law. He was ruling based on his personal bias, plain and simple. And that's what these appeal courts said. So important. Now, and again, whether you hate Donald Trump, love Donald Trump, whatever it is, we should all be able to step out of that bubble politically right now and just look at this. Is it right that a judge, apparently based on documentation here, is not following the rule of law? Is that dangerous to anybody else who may come along, not only with this judge, but anybody else? And by the way, I've been in front of those judges, literally saying, you know what, Officer Garrett, I don't agree with that I don't agree with the way the signage is on that. And I know they were actually in violation because I don't agree with the way it's set up. I'm gonna find this defendant not guilty of the traffic violation. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? You're going to rule because you don't like the way something's set up, but the city council or state of California or whatever it is, they set these signs up in accordance with the rule of law, with local permitting processes. Nothing was done outside of the law. You may not like it, Your Honor, but this was actually done in accordance with the law. Since you don't like it, you're going to find someone not guilty of violating a law. I've been up against this as well. It was dangerous when I was a cop on the stand, and it's dangerous now. I want everybody to try to appreciate this. That's what judges are supposed to do. They can say a law should be changed, but they can't rule because they think a law should be changed. They have to rule on the way the law is now. So with that, I want to move over here. Don't worry, there's no videotape of this person or audio tape because after Enguerrand, I don't think I could take it. Anthony, and I'm getting at here. I want to talk about the person behind this and her bias as well. And that is one New York Attorney General, Leticia James. I think, didn't you support her campaign? Is that right, Anthony? I can't remember now. Did you send money to her campaign? Is that right?
Yeah, are you accessing my bank records?
Well, yeah, the federal government? No, I didn't do that. By the way, I just want to say for clarity, if you guys didn't figure out that I was kidding, Anthony's probably going to curse at me when we hang up for even making that joke. But I want you to listen to another, I'm going to read her words, another not so impartial person involving this case with Donald Trump. So you always have two people or two entities involved when you're talking about whether it's civil or criminal. You have the court, of course, but then you have to have someone bring a suit. And by the way, a citizen can bring a civil suit, things like that, but sometimes so can an attorney general, a prosecutor. Here's what we have right now. So the New York Attorney General, Leticia James, made waves before she was officially sworn in. But those waves, as predicted, appeared to be crashing down on her. Recall that James was not in the least bit indirect about her intentions regarding the Trump family once she became Attorney General. Now, this is so important. I'm going to read a quote here from her because look back at let's say the mafia, let's say organized crime, and you look at any prosecutor. You look going back 30 plus 40 years with Rudy Giuliani, with organized crime, or any prosecutor, any DA, any attorney general, we're talking about certain organized crime or even unorganized crime, just random crime with murder rates or things like this. And you have people that are campaigning to be elected attorney general or a district attorney. And certainly they campaign on, I'm going to go after this type of behavior. I'm going to go after this organized crime. I'm going to make sure that we are prosecuting people who violate XYZ to the fullest extent of the law. That's totally appropriate. You should be saying what your policy is going to be. But what you cannot do in an ethical sense is to say, I'm going to prosecute someone for a crime with which they have not been charged. That is a case of finding an individual and then finding a violation with which to charge them after the fact. And this is exactly what Leticia James did. So this is before she was sworn in as Attorney General. I'm going to quote her. We will use every area of the law to investigate President Trump and his business transactions and that of his family as well, she said in an interview with NBC News. We want to investigate anyone in his orbit who has, in fact, violated the law. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I never went to law school, but I think that any 10-year-old, if they read this, will realize how absurd, dangerous, unfair, unprofessional, and unethical this is, especially the last sentence. We want to investigate anyone in his orbit who has, in fact, violated the law. Did you hear that? In other words, we want to investigate to find out if someone violated the law. How do you know in fact someone violated the law unless you investigate them?
So she said
Unless
this.
you
Sorry, Mark. She said this before she became the Attorney General.
before she was sworn in. She may have been elected, but since before she was sworn in. In other words, it's a great question, Anthony, because she wasn't sworn in yet, so she didn't have any information, at least legally at that point, officially, to indicate that Donald Trump may or may not have violated any law.
You know what I'd like to see is her net worth from this point on to
Oh,
now.
it's a great point. And if you have some numbers on that, Anthony, because I believe her net worth is somewhere, I know it's above 5 million. I want to say it's above 10 million. If you may or may not have those numbers in front of you, but her net worth from that time until where we are now has skyrocketed.
$17 million net worth, according to this article 6 days ago. Is that how much an
17
AG gets paid?
You know what? This is the only reason I never ran for AG, because they were only paying $4.4 million a year. It wasn't enough for me. Yeah. You know what? I think it's at a couple $100,000 a year, or maybe a little more that she makes.
You have
Maybe you can look that up when we're
17
talking.
million though.
$17 million. $17 million net worth. Ladies and gentlemen, does that at all sound unseemly? Does it sound strange that an attorney general without any other, in other words, you could have your own business, you could own a car dealership or restaurant chain or whatever it is before, but none of those things existed as far as I know with Leticia James. I'm just asking the question. I'm just asking the
She
question.
gets paid
How do you
$220,000 a
come up
year.
$220,000 a year salary? And again, I don't know if somebody wants to in the comments, please let me know what other legitimate sources of income that this woman may have, and God bless
I
her.
saw donations,
But I'm curious,
investments.
On $220,000 a year,
Hmm.
yeah, somehow she has parlayed that into a $17 million net worth. By the way, what's the source of that that you're citing, Anthony? Or
Let's
just so
see.
people know.
There's actually a ton of them. Yeah, they
So
range from $15 million to 17 million. And then with her salary, there's a bunch of articles as well. So it's pretty well known actually that what her net worth is. I think a lot of people are looking it up.
yeah, so I just wanted to get that out there, and the net worth thing, I'm so glad you brought it up because I'm just asking the question. I think everybody should ask the question, how does a government employee look, I was a government employee for 30 years in law enforcement, and trust me, I don't have a $17 million net worth. And by the way, if I did have a $17 million net worth, wouldn't anybody who knew that, wouldn't you be curious? Just honestly ask yourself, wouldn't you be curious? How did Mark Garrett, how did he come to be worth $17 million if that were the case? Wouldn't you be asking that question? Wouldn't my friends be asking that question? Wouldn't anybody who knew, who might find out, wouldn't they be asking that question? And I'm asking the question now, what has she done? Where did the money come from? How did this actually happen? And why would we trust anybody who says, find me the man and I'll find you the crime? That's what that quote says right there. We
Yes.
want to investigate anyone in his orbit who has, in fact, violated the law. That's what she said. Does that sound like an objective respecter of the rule of law? The final quote from here in this one, there's a lot in here, and I'm not going to subject you to all of it. But quote, Donald Trump's days of defrauding Americans are coming to an end. She would add, we can spot a carnival barker. That's her quote. In other words, we can spot a con man. That would be great if some victim or somebody who actually claimed that they have been defrauded or conned by him, but no one ever has, ladies and gentlemen, at least not in this arena right now. No victim has come forward, especially these people who loaned him money. So between Leticia James and this Judge Engoron, in my humble opinion, we are dealing with people who are predisposed for various reasons about outcomes of investigations and rulings, despite the rule of law. We're seeing this case fall apart as it is already. Thank God that the circuit court, I believe, that reduced his bond from $454 million to $175 million, which will allow now Trump to appeal this court. And mark my words, everything that happened to him in this ruling is going to be overturned. He will win this case. It won't even be a close call. It's going to happen, and it'll be another embarrassment for this judge and an embarrassment for this so-called attorney general. I think she's an attorney activist, what we should call her an AA. That's exactly what she is.
And you know what?
Now, speaking of the,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, you know what? I'm
Go
glad
ahead.
that you brought up the bail amount and stuff. And also just
I am too.
going back to the net worth type of thing. There was an old adage that said, follow the money. Why aren't we doing that anymore? We've been programmed, or there's something with, I think it's actually just the media, the mainstream media, not doing its actual real job of doing that. Because anywhere down the line, you just go, okay, where did the money go? Then you look at the people who actually received all this money, and then you look at their character, you look at what they're doing, And that just tells all the truth. You don't even need to hear them babbling their mouth. You don't need to hear other people telling you what they're doing is good or bad, whatever. People cannot make their own judgments because they simply just forgot that one little tiny phrase, follow the money. That's what we always used to
Anthony,
do.
it's an excellent point. I think we don't hear as much anymore because unfortunately the media is not as objective as it used to be. And again, I am parsing my words here. I'm being delicate here. Probably should be a lot more forceful, but I'm just saying the media is not doing what the media is supposed to do, and that's to be an objective observer and reporter of the news rather than making the news or slanting the news in one favor, one direction or another.
I'll even
But
add on.
you actually
Oh, go ahead.
you go ahead. Add
I
on.
was going to say, at some point, though, when you're responsible for giving insight to the public about what's going on in the world or what's going on with certain people or businesses or what's happening in your community, and you're not reporting things that are actually harmful and causing harm to you and me, that's criminal, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think it's criminal. It's certainly criminal in an ethical sense. It absolutely is criminal in an ethical sense, Anthony. I agree with you. But I did bring up the bail amount with Trump, and this is another great point that you actually raised when we were getting ready for the show. And I thought, God, how did I not make this comparison? You made the comparison. So I want you to take this and run with it and have at it. I'll back out of
And
here. Go
you know
ahead.
what? One more thing before we move on from the bail onto the bail amount, I do want to just touch
Mhm.
on one thing about the evaluation of the Mar-a-Lago property and just a whole defrauding deal. So there's one guy that's very critical of Trump, very critical. I'm sure you know of him. His name is Jon Stewart. Okay.
Yes.
He actually sold his house, I don't know, a couple years ago for $17.1 million, I believe. Fact check me if I'm wrong, but it was 17 something million dollars, while it was worth only $1 million, right?
Yes.
And everybody's going, big whoop. The guy paid for it. He wanted the house. That's fine. That's fair. That's 829% increase that he
Yep.
overinflated his house. And this is a individual who bought it. He actually lost $4 million. A real person who lost $4 million on the house deal.
Mm.
And nobody is bringing up a single thing. Jon Stewart actually tweeted about it and said that he was being sarcastic about it, saying that he did no wrong.
Yeah.
While you have
Yes. He's
Trump,
laughing about
yeah,
it.
yeah, while you actually have Trump, them saying that he defrauded all these people. And what did he do? He built tons of businesses, employing hundreds, if not
Thousands
thousands of people in the state of New York and other places as
and other
well,
places.
boosting the economy up. And you have somebody, Jon Stewart, who defrauds a guy for $4 million. More than that,
Mhm.
because he increased his house 800 something percent. And then,
And just to be clear, what you mean by the guy losing money because he resold it at a
yes,
loss,
he resold it at
correct?
a loss.
So I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah,
So he really was certainly in a financial way, he was victimized there. Now again, he made the choice to buy it, and he needs to do his own research and get his own financial valuations on the property. So this laissez-faire, buyer beware. But if anybody defrauded anybody or overly inflated the value of their property, it was Jon Stewart,
right. And that goes
I
back
would
to
say.
Trump making these deals with the bankers and these
Mhm.
lenders and stuff. They have to do their own due diligence and go to these properties and see, okay, yeah, we could build 2,200 apartments on this property right here. We could do this and that. Everything checks out. They're the ones who are supposed to do that. And the
And they
person
did, by
trying
the
to
way.
get the
They said
money,
they did.
yes, the person trying to get the
Mhm.
money is negotiating. They're trying to get as much money as they can, which is it's just a fair thing. It is a fair system. It's not that he showed them some false information and then they took his word for it. They looked at it and they go, okay, you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Correct.
And
Mhm.
these people have their own jobs and they decide, okay, I'm going to loan out to this man hundreds of millions of dollars for this and that. And they do their own research and they ended up making hundreds of millions of dollars on it. So that's just the contrast. And then, like you said, with the bail amounts, I want to go on to yesterday.
Please do,
Yeah,
because this is
I believe it was, let me check the date. It was the 28th of March. Sam Bankman-Fried got sentenced to 25 years in prison.
And who was he? Remind the audience.
So he was part of the whole FTX crypto scam. And so what he did was his bail amount, by the way, was $250 million. And how much was Trump's?
454. Now, again, it was a bond. In other words, he had to pay that in order to appeal the case.
There we go.
If not, his properties get seized, things like that. So one's at bail, one's at bond, but really effectively, they're the same thing in this case. Go ahead.
And I'll tell you, for those who are not familiar with the crypto space and all that, it is very high risk investments. You can lose all your money or you can gain a crap ton of money. It depends on where you're putting your money and stuff like that. However, this guy, he was managing billions of dollars of just regular people like you and me, our funds. And he ended up funneling that money out and giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the Democratic Party. So he was donating people's money to his political interests, which to this day, there's no talk on how to get that money back. Where'd that money go?
Right.
Okay. Another thing, in January of 2022, he sold $75 million of Ethereum and caused a mini crypto crash. And when that happens, all these other coins that are underneath those coins ended up crashing even harder. And so a lot of people panic sell. They sell all of their money and now they're down 80, 90, 99% on what could be their hard earned money.
Their life savings.
Yes, their life savings. And so what he also did was he took the funds and money laundered it through buying meme coins. And when someone sees a coin go up 100%, there's that FOMO. They want to go and they want to buy it too. And they want to be a part of that bull run too. And so what he did was he bought a bunch of, just for instance, this coin called Shiba. He buys this coin and he's a massive whale in there. The price skyrockets up and he dumps. So what that means is he buys that coin, rides it to the top. Everybody's putting their money in and then he sells. So he's taking all of that money essentially and manipulating the crypto market. And he's done that with several different coins. Go ahead.
And I'm sorry, but your point is, and by the way, you just schooled me because this is deeper than I've ever been schooled on exactly what he did. I knew that he defrauded people. And again, he ruined countless numbers of people's lives.
Yes.
He just got sentenced to 25 years in prison because, again, there are countless tangible, documentable victims out there. And his bail amount, in other words, for him to stay out while the trial was going on or before he got sentenced, whatever, was $250 million. Trump's bail or bond was 454 million with no victim articulated.
Not one.
Zero. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why it was so important when Anthony raised this point to me yesterday. I thought, God, we have to put things in perspective.
Right.
A man who ruined countless lives, who's going to prison for 25 years, his bail was only $250 million. A man who has no victims. In fact, the claimed victims say we're not victims. We made money. Can we do it again with this guy? Because he's so reliable. He's so trustworthy. Is accountable for $454 million. Clearly, this is pure bias on the part of this judge. One other example of someone who ruined lives, and we know it's documentable. People left suicide notes all over the world, is Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff, he took life savings, not only for individual investors, but companies on, but so many people literally committed suicide over those losses. When he was on trial, by the way, he died in prison. He died in prison a couple of years ago, a few years ago. But if we're right, and I think you gave me this number, his bail was $10 million. He was out on bail for $10 million. And people knew very early on, once the chips started falling and investigation led to his horrible criminal activity, he was out on bail, $10 million. But Trump is $454 million with no victims that anyone can articulate.
Yeah, and
So,
I do want to add too that Sam Bankman-Fried, the victims of him are untold because he had
yes, it's
affected
a great point.
such a wide range of the crypto market that everybody was touched on it. Everybody. If you had any investment in the crypto space during that time, you were affected by Sam Bankman-Fried. That's millions of people that he's affected.
It's yeah, Anthony, it's a great point. In other words, one doesn't have to kill oneself in order to be ruined. You could still live your life. Maybe you can even still put it back partially. But so many people in that world, in the world of investment, and obviously a lot of people invest in crypto, but there are people who certainly lost every cent that they owned around the world because of this horrible individual. And just like with Madoff,
Mhm.
but they are treated quite a bit different. By the way, Madoff and Bateman were, in my opinion, were treated properly. Both going to prison. One died in prison, and one for probably most of the rest of his life, and absolutely appropriate.
And the reason why I brought up the kind of the intricacies of Sam Bankman-Fried too was that they are painting him to be some autistic kid that just made a mistake. But
No.
what he actually did was very strategic and calculated on how he money laundered this money through making NFTs and buying it himself, selling locked coins, which means that the coins are locked. They cannot be sold or bought. And
Mhm.
when people are investing in these coins and they see that they're locked, that means that for a set amount of time, they're guaranteed not to sell. And he just dumps on them. So he strategically was doing this and living out the best life that he could while using customers' funds. So I don't want people to look at him because there's photos of him being all sad in the courtroom and stuff. And he was like a psychopath with it, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. He's the evil genius is probably what he
Yeah.
was. And but again, I keep going back to the whole point of this is the comparison with the legal system here. Uh, and clearly how it's slanted so heavily against a certain segment of the population, especially if you happen to be prominent and maybe if you happen to be the leading candidate for a particular party for the presidential race. It should be frightening people. It's not. And again, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum someone is on. The rule of law is there for a reason. It is to the best possible extent take bias out of the process and to have an even set of rules no matter what political affiliations or whatever other characteristics or maybe in play. That's what the rule of law is. And clearly we have people that are gleefully engaged in disregarding the rule of law who are sworn to do just the opposite and to revere the rule of law. So with that said, I want to wind it up with this. And this is not now it's not brand new news to anybody, but whether you are doesn't matter what your line of work is, doesn't matter what you do for a living, uh, being a parent, whatever your calling in life is, your particular role right now, in your particular part of life, we only have so much time and so many resources to accomplish whatever it is we want to accomplish or what we're responsible for. Like I said, in your line of work, if you work in the sanitation field, if you are a lawyer, if you're a taxi cab driver, or you're a doctor, you're an airline pilot, you are a construction worker, you're a police officer, it doesn't matter. We only have so much time and resource in a day to do what we need to do or what we want to do. And so when you look at different law enforcement or officials or magistrates and what they're doing with the time and the resources at their fingertips, you really wonder how bad off are we? And so I said, this is not brand new to the listeners, but it's very important. Again, comparison and perspective are so important, ladies and gentlemen, in life. So we know that just unfortunately, a few days ago, we had an NYPD officer, Jonathan Diller, 31 years old, murdered during a traffic stop. They say routine traffic stop, and there is no routine traffic stop. And this is a prime example of why he was murdered on this traffic during this traffic stop by a monster who had 21 prior arrests. Again, obviously, this is in the state of New York, where the Attorney General, Leticia James, is spending her time and her office's resources on suing a man who has no articulated, no identified victims, trying to put him out of business, trying to seize his homes, obviously trying to thwart his ability to finance his own presidential campaign. She said before she was sworn into office that this is the guy she's going to go after. This is the guy, and people in his orbit are the people that she's going to investigate and look for any possible crime. I'm reading this from an article, I'm reading her quotes, not knowing of a crime, but she's going to try to find one. Meanwhile, people like this young man, Jonathan Diller, who has a wife, a 1-year-old baby son at home, he's dead because the powers in New York State and New York City are allowing monsters, evil monsters like this piece of human excrement to be on the street who has 21 prior arrests, multiple felonies, multiple violent crimes. If I remember correctly, attempted murder is one of the crimes, multiple gun charges. The people, the party who are so keen on ending gun violence. I tell you, here's how you end gun violence. You take the monsters off the street that use the guns illegally. You can leave 100 guns in my house or any number of people that I know, and the firearms are not going to be used illegally. But you leave just one gun with a monster like this who killed Officer Diller, and guess what? Bad things will happen. But where do they spend their resources? Putting people like this guy in prison? No. They spend untold amount of time, energy, money, and by the way, and political clout behind going after political opponents, people they just don't like, for crimes they can't even really articulate that were ever committed. This is disgusting. And this will be the downfall of our nation if we do not get back to adhering to the rule of law. Individual citizens, absolutely. Police officers, prosecutors, judges. If we don't take our bias out of our jobs in these particular arenas, we will see chaos. We will see the downfall of this country. It starts community by community. And by the way, this is why George Soros is going after supporting all of these whack job DAs, is because he knows that if you can break down community by community or county by county, that you can tear down, you can rip apart the fabric of our civil society. And by God, it's working so far. But if what Anthony and I have does not strike a nerve with you, nothing will. If you cannot just step back, and right now, for the sake of this discussion, just go ahead and remove your own bias from the situation. And do you think this is a fair use of resources when you have attorneys general that have predetermined before they're in office what they're going to do to an individual who has yet not been charged with a crime at the time that she provided that quote? Is that not dangerous to you? Is that not dangerous? Would you be happy if another candidate or someone who had not been sworn in as attorney general said, I'm going to go after XYZ person for something? I'm going to investigate everything I can about that person. And if I find a crime, I'm going to prosecute them. And you take your political candidate and you put their name in that sentence, someone that you like, and ask yourself how you'd feel about that attorney general or about that DA or about that judge if they said something to that effect. Ask yourself that question. Be honest with yourself. And what would you think of that prosecutor? I think we all know the answer. Meanwhile, Jonathan Diller's widow and child's life are ruined forever, changed forever, because of the absolute dereliction of duty by prosecutors and judges in the state of New York, by nobody else. The cops are arresting these people. They're putting them behind bars for a few minutes as best they can, and they're out on the street again before the cops can finish the booking forms. So, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you, Anthony, for being on, for providing this important information. We ask that you stay safe. Today's recording is right before the Easter holiday. We want everybody to have a wonderful Easter weekend, Easter Sunday. God bless you all. For those of you who indulge in Passover and Easter, and we just pray that you have a wonderful weekend. God bless America. Thank you for listening. And Anthony, again, thank you for being a part of today's show. We look forward to having you on as a guest in the future.
Thank you.
Take care, buddy.